Michael's fingers hovered above the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. His breath caught as his phone buzzed, an unexpected notification flashing in his peripheral vision. It wasn't just any message. It was from Matthew Edwards, the billionaire CEO of one of the world's most powerful tech companies. A man who had everything: power, wealth, and influence. Everything that Michael had always resented, everything that had made him feel invisible. The message was short, simple, and utterly shocking. "Let's meet. I want to hear your thoughts." For a moment, Michael could barely breathe. His pulse thundered in his ears. Was this real? Was it a joke, a prank, or worse, a calculated move to humiliate him for the snarky tweet he'd fired off hours earlier? The tweet where he had mocked Edwards' flashy lifestyle and arrogant disregard for the struggles of ordinary people. The world outside his apartment seemed to close in on him. He wasn't just a frustrated, jobless graduate anymore. This was something bigger. His fingers trembled as he read the message again. His phone buzzed again. Another notification. This time, a follow-up from Edwards. "It's not a joke. I'm serious. Let's meet." A chill ran down Michael's spine. Was this an opportunity, or was it a trap? The same question spiraled in his head. The message was direct, unexpected, and it changed everything. What had he just done? He had just mocked a billionaire with more power than he could ever dream of. Now, this man wanted to meet him? The weight of the moment hit Michael like a wave. He could feel his heart racing, each beat faster than the last. He wasn't just being invited to meet a CEO, he was being invited into a world that had always seemed so distant, so untouchable. And Michael had no idea whether he was ready for it. What did Edwards want from him? The hours before the meeting felt like a slow crawl through a nightmare. Michael could barely sleep. His thoughts were in a storm, a swirl of possibilities, doubts, and questions. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment, the cold glow of the streetlights outside flickering through the blinds. His mind refused to quiet down. What the hell had he done? A sarcastic tweet? A jab at a man who represented everything he despised. And now, here he was, facing the possibility of meeting the billionaire CEO whose life he had mocked. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. It wasn't supposed to spiral into something real. But it had. And now the entire future seemed to hinge on one simple question. Why? Was this Edwards' way of putting him in his place? Was this a trap to expose him as a fool? Or was it a chance that Michael could never get again? He didn't know, but he felt something stirring deep inside. His fear, yes, but also something else. Something that felt like a spark of hope, a flicker of possibility. The next morning, Michael stood in front of his mirror. The same mirror that reflected a young man with too many dreams and not enough opportunities. His clothes, a tired suit he barely fit into anymore, looked ill-fitting, his tie too tight, the jacket uncomfortable against his skin. He hadn't imagined a moment like this, didn't think he would ever be sitting across from a man like Matthew Edwards, a man whose wealth and power had always seemed like a far-off fantasy. But now, it was real. Michael swallowed the nerves in his throat and forced himself to take a step out of his apartment. The streets outside were bustling with activity, people moving in a blur. The city was alive with ambition, opportunity, and luxury. All things Michael felt he had never quite been able to reach. When he arrived at the cafe, the sharp contrast hit him hard. The polished marble floors, the gleaming glass walls, the aura of wealth and exclusivity that seemed to ooze from every corner. Michael's stomach churned. He was out of place here, an outsider in a world he had always mocked. But now he was about to step into it, into the world of the very man he had condemned just the night before. There, sitting at a corner table, was Matthew Edwards. The man looked exactly as Michael had imagined, poised, sharp, and effortlessly commanding. Edwards was dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair gleaming under the soft light. He had an air of authority that made the room feel smaller, more suffocating. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room, exuding a sense of control. Michael hesitated at the edge of the room before Edwards looked up, locking eyes with him. It was as though time slowed for a brief moment, the tension building between them. Edwards' gaze seemed to penetrate Michael's very soul, the kind of look only someone with immense power could command. "Michael," Edwards said, his voice smooth and confident, "glad you could make it." Michael forced a smile, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. As he approached the table, Edwards stood up, extending a hand. Michael took it, feeling the cold firmness of a handshake that was more than just polite. It was a signal of power, a signal that this meeting, this moment, was much more than it seemed. They sat down, and Michael felt the weight of the silence between them. The conversation that had led to this point, the tweet, seemed like a distant memory now. He was no longer just a jobless graduate on the outside looking in. Now he was here, in front of the man who could make or break his future. Edwards leaned forward slightly, his gaze unyielding. "I saw your tweet," he said, his voice measured but carrying an undeniable edge. "It struck a nerve with me. You've got fire, Michael. But fire without direction? It's dangerous. Do you understand that?" Michael blinked, the words hitting him harder than he expected. He had known Edwards was powerful, but to have him acknowledge the tweet, the anger he had expressed, it was as if his frustration had been seen, heard. But now he had to face the consequences of it. I didn't mean to upset you," Michael said, his voice trembling despite himself. "I was just frustrated. Job hunting is, well, it's been tough." Edwards gave a small nod. "I know what it's like to feel that way. But here's the thing. You don't get to where I am by complaining. You get there by using that frustration, that anger, as fuel to push yourself. You've got to turn it into something more. Can you do that?" Michael felt the weight of the question. This wasn't just a meeting. This was a challenge, an invitation into something he didn't fully understand. "You don't just get a seat at the table by being frustrated," Edwards continued, his voice quiet but powerful. "You earn it. And what I want to know, Michael, is whether you've got what it takes to push yourself to the limit, to prove you belong." The words hung in the air between them, each syllable laden with meaning. Edwards wasn't offering him a job. He was offering him something far more dangerous, a chance to prove himself in a world that could destroy him just as easily as it could build him up. Michael's mind raced. This was no longer about a tweet. This was about survival. And for the first time in a long time, Michael realized that he didn't have a choice. "I'm in," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "I'll prove myself." Edwards smirked, a glint of satisfaction flashing in his eyes. "Good. I'll see you Monday." The weight of Edwards' words lingered long after the meeting had ended. As Michael walked out of the cafe, the bustling city outside felt different, bigger, more intimidating, but it also felt like a door had just opened, a door to something new, something he didn't understand but had no choice but to walk through. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it, his mind too consumed with what had just happened. What had he gotten himself into? What did Edwards really want from him? But before Michael could fully process what lay ahead, he found himself thinking back to the moment when it all started, when a tweet, born out of anger and frustration, had set everything in motion. He had mocked a billionaire. Now he was going to have to face the consequences. Let me take you back a few weeks earlier, when everything changed for Michael. But before we go any further, let us know what part of the world are you watching from. Comment your country below. Let's build a global community rooted in kindness and second chances. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your friends. Your support brings us closer to our 1K subscriber milestone and inspires us to keep creating more emotional stories of resilience, healing, and Black excellence. Thank you for being part of our journey. Your presence matters more than you know.
Michael did not grow up angry. That part matters. He grew up hopeful, not the loud kind of hope, the quiet, stubborn type, the kind that wakes up early even when nothing is guaranteed, the kind that believes effort eventually pays. His parents drilled it into him without meaning to. Wake up early, be respectful, stay in school. Don't cut corners. If you do things right, life will do you right back. Michael carried that belief like a badge. School became his escape. Not because he loved classes, but because school promised an ending, a finish line, a degree, proof that suffering had purpose. He watched others joke through life while he stayed focused. While they skipped lectures, he stayed back. While they partied, he worked part-time jobs. He imagined graduation day like a door swinging open. And when that day finally came, it felt empty. The applause faded too quickly. The smiles disappeared. The congratulatory messages stopped. Reality stepped in without warning. No safety net, no grace period, just a harsh quiet where opportunity was supposed to be. Michael applied everywhere. Big firms, small firms, startups, government roles, jobs that required his degree, jobs that barely respected it. Each application felt like dropping a piece of himself into a void. Each rejection email felt colder than the last. Some didn't even bother responding. Weeks turned into months. The hardest part wasn't poverty, it was invisibility. People stopped asking how the job hunt was going. Friends avoided the topic. Family tried to be encouraging, but their voices carried concern they couldn't hide. Michael started lying casually, saying things were moving, saying interviews were lined up, saying something would break through soon. At night he scrolled. That's where Matthew Edwards lived. Edwards wasn't just rich, he was everywhere. Interviews clipped into motivational reels, tweets that went viral, quotes about discipline framed like scripture. He talked about grit like a man who had never been cornered by it. He talked about sacrifice like someone who forgot what hunger felt like, and yet people worshipped him. Michael tried to understand why. He watched every interview, read between the lines, not because he admired Edwards, but because he wanted to figure out what separated men like him from men like Edwards. Somewhere between curiosity and resentment, something twisted. It wasn't jealousy. Michael didn't want yachts. He wanted dignity. He wanted a chance to prove himself without being laughed at by systems rigged against him. He wanted the effort to match the reward. The night of the tweet was quiet, too quiet. One of those nights where the silence in your room feels louder than traffic. Michael had just gotten another rejection. Polite words, empty phrases. We regret to inform you. He sat on his bed in that same small apartment, bills still taped to the fridge, suit still hanging untouched, phone heavy in his hand. He opened Twitter without thinking, saw Edwards smiling at a gala, saw a caption about mindset and opportunity. That's when the thought surfaced. Then another. Then the sentence formed. Michael typed it slowly. He wasn't ranting, he was precise. He aimed at hypocrisy, at the distance between speeches and reality. He pressed send before doubt could catch up. For the first time in months, he felt relief. He didn't expect a response. He didn't expect anything at all. He went to sleep thinking the moment would dissolve by morning. But Matthew Edwards saw it. Edwards was not offended. He was curious. Power changes the way men listen. When you have everything, compliments mean nothing. Criticism stands out. This one wasn't sloppy. It wasn't emotional. It carried understanding. It came from someone paying attention. Edwards had spent years surrounded by polished minds, safe minds, people trained to say what he wanted to hear. Somewhere along the way, he started to feel insulated, untouchable. He hated that feeling more than he admitted. Michael's tweet cracked something open. Edwards pulled Michael's profile, scrolled quietly, no clout chasing. No wild posts, just thoughts, observations, frustration sharpened into language, a young man thinking too much in a world that didn't care. Edwards remembered himself. Not the success, the early years, the anger, the recklessness, the hunger. He remembered what it felt like to stand outside power and spit at it because it refused to notice you. That night, Edwards decided to do something unusual. He didn't argue. He didn't clap back. He didn't ignore it. He reached out. For Michael, the message shattered the illusion of distance. Billionaires were not supposed to see people like him. They existed in headlines, not inboxes. When the phone buzzed, his body reacted before his mind could catch up. Heart racing, breath shallow, reality bending. Sleep abandoned him that night. Every possible outcome ran through his head. Humiliation, legal threats, public embarrassment, or worse, being used, being crushed quietly, being reminded of his place. But beneath the fear, something else pulsed. Hope, dangerous hope, the kind that shows up when you have nothing left to lose. By the time morning came, Michael was already changed. He hadn't stepped into the cafe yet. He hadn't shaken Edward's hand yet. But the line between the world he mocked and the world that mocked him had dissolved. This meeting wasn't random. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't kindness. It was two forces colliding at the exact moment they were both vulnerable in different ways. And whether Michael survived it or not, that part was still unknown.
Michael spent the entire night tossing and turning in his bed, his mind running wild with countless questions, doubts, and fears. Every time he closed his eyes, the unsettling thought of what tomorrow would bring would crash into his consciousness, and he would lie wide awake again, staring at the dark ceiling above him. The clock on his nightstand ticked relentlessly, each second reminding him that he was running out of time to figure out what this meeting with Matthew Edwards was all about. Was it a trap? A calculated move to humiliate him? To show him just how small he really was? Or was it an opportunity, an unexpected chance to prove himself in a world he had always looked at from the outside? Every scenario played out in his head, but none of them felt quite right. His phone, resting on the nightstand, buzzed periodically with notifications. A few were from friends who had no idea what was going on. Some were job updates, the usual rejection emails that now felt like nothing more than a routine slap in the face. But then there was the one message, from Edwards, the message that had changed everything. "Let's meet. I want to hear your thoughts." Michael reread it again. It still didn't make sense. Why would Edwards, a man who could buy and sell him in an instant, want to meet with a broke, angry graduate who had mocked him on social media? He could feel the weight of that question pressing on his chest as he closed his eyes, willing sleep to take him. But sleep never came. The night dragged on, endless and suffocating. When the morning finally arrived, Michael had gotten barely an hour of rest. He sat up on the edge of his bed, staring at his reflection in the mirror across the room. His eyes were bloodshot, his mind a haze of uncertainty. He had always dreamed of a different life, one where he didn't feel like an outsider, one where his hard work would finally pay off. But now, staring at his reflection, he saw only someone who had no real answers, not even for himself. The message from Edwards had been clear, but the reality of it was anything but. There was no denying it anymore. This was happening. He was going to meet Matthew Edwards, the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the world, a man who was known for his ruthless approach to business, a man who, according to every article Michael had ever read, didn't give second chances. Michael dragged himself out of bed, throwing on his best clothes, a suit that no longer fit him as well as it had when he first bought it. He hated the feeling of wearing something that didn't quite fit, but it was the best he had. As he looked himself over in the mirror, trying to pull off a semblance of confidence, he realized something. He had no choice but to meet Edwards. The possibilities were too big to ignore. This was his chance to prove something, not just to Edwards, but to himself. The coffee shop was everything Michael had imagined it would be. Located in one of the most upscale districts in downtown Chicago, the cafe was a place where people walked in wearing designer clothes and left their personal problems at the door. Polished marble floors gleamed beneath their expensive shoes, and the scent of rich, dark coffee filled the air. The patrons sat in hushed conversations, surrounded by the elegant decor. Soft lighting, glass walls offering a panoramic view of the skyline, and expensive artwork adorning the walls. Michael felt completely out of place as he entered, his heart pounding in his chest. It was as if the cafe's elegance mocked him, reminding him of everything he had yet to achieve. The waitstaff greeted him with practiced politeness, leading him to the back corner where he was told Edwards would be waiting. And there he was. Matthew Edwards sat at a table, alone, exuding an air of authority that was almost tangible. His silver hair gleamed under the soft lighting, his sharp jawline adding to his commanding presence. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, the dark fabric accentuating his lean frame. His piercing blue eyes scanned the room, never lingering on any one thing for too long, as if he was always calculating, always observing. It was the look of a man who controlled everything around him, and Michael felt it immediately. The closer he got, the more intimidated he became. This wasn't just any meeting. This was with someone who had built empires, someone who could change his life with a single word. The weight of the moment settled heavily on his chest as he took the final steps toward Edwards. Edwards looked up just as Michael reached the table. There was no surprise, no judgment in his eyes, only the quiet certainty that came from a man who had seen it all. "Michael," Edwards said, standing up and offering his hand. His voice was firm, controlled, and yet there was an undercurrent of something else, something that was impossible to place. His handshake was unyielding, cold, but polite. Michael could feel the strength in it, a reminder that he was in the presence of someone who would not be easily swayed. They both sat down. Michael fumbled with his napkin for a moment, trying to steady his shaking hands. He was nervous, no question about it, but there was something more than that. A knot of anticipation had taken root in his stomach. What was Edwards really after? Why had he reached out? Was this just a power play? Or something more? Edwards wasted no time. His eyes locked with Michael's, his expression unreadable. "I saw your tweet," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge. It struck a nerve. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected Edwards to address it so directly, and now, with the weight of the conversation pressing down on him, he wasn't sure how to respond. His stomach turned. "I didn't mean to offend you," Michael blurted, but it felt hollow. The words came out too quickly, too apologetic. Edwards didn't seem moved by it. "I know," Edwards replied, his gaze unwavering. "You're frustrated, I get it. I've been there." He leaned in slightly as if trying to read every emotion flickering across Michael's face. "But here's the thing, Michael. You don't get to where I am by complaining. You get there by turning that fire, that anger, into something real. You understand that, don't you?" Michael nodded, though he wasn't sure he completely understood. There was something cold, almost calculated about Edwards's approach. It wasn't warm, it wasn't reassuring. It was challenging. "You've got fire, Michael," Edwards continued, his voice now more intense. "But fire without direction can burn everything down. That's what you need to figure out. You've got to learn to control that fire, channel it, make it work for you. And I want to know if you're willing to do that." It hit Michael like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a job offer. This wasn't a simple opportunity. Edwards wasn't looking for someone to fill a position. He was looking for someone with potential, someone who could prove themselves worthy of standing beside him in his world. And if Michael couldn't handle it, he would be thrown away like everyone else who had failed before him. Edwards sat back, watching Michael carefully. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then Edwards spoke again, his tone even colder now, his words measured. "I'm not offering you a job. I'm offering you a challenge. You'll prove yourself, or you'll walk away with nothing. This isn't about handouts, Michael. It's about learning how the world really works, how power works. It's about understanding that success doesn't come from whining or waiting for someone to feel sorry for you. Michael's heart raced. His palms were clammy, but there was no backing out now. This was it. This was the moment. The moment when everything could change. "What do you want me to do?" Michael asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I want you to show me that you have what it takes to survive in my world," Edward said, his voice low but powerful. "You'll work hard. You'll face challenges, and you'll fail. But that's the point. How you handle the failures, that's what matters. Prove to me that you can handle the heat. I'll be watching." Michael's mind raced. His life, his future was hanging by a thread. But in that moment, there was no turning back. He couldn't back down now, not after everything he had gone through. "I'm in," he said, his voice firm, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "I'll prove myself." Edwards leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good," he said. "I'll see you Monday." And with that, Michael's world shifted. He had no idea what was coming next. He had no idea how much he would be tested, how far he would be pushed. But one thing was certain. This was his chance. His chance to make something of himself. His chance to rise from the ashes of his failures. And he wasn't going to waste it. The elevator doors slid open, and Michael stepped into the heart of the skyscraper, a fortress of glass and steel that overlooked the sprawling city below. The view was breathtaking, but all he could focus on was the weight of the task ahead. His first day at Edwards Enterprises. The elevator pinged and Michael stepped out, feeling like an imposter in the sleek, polished lobby. Everything about the building screamed power. The clean lines of the marble floors, the towering glass windows, the quiet efficiency of the staff. He was out of his element, his old suit ill-fitting and his tie too tight. He barely knew anyone here, and in a place this massive that made him feel smaller than he already did. As he walked down the hall to his designated workspace, he thought about what had brought him here. One tweet, one moment of frustration, and now, here he was, about to work in a world he had once resented. A world that seemed built on ruthless ambition, privilege, and a disregard for anything other than results. But Michael had no choice. He had signed up for this. He had asked for this. His desk was tucked in a corner of an open-plan office, far from the high-powered meetings he imagined Edwards would be holding elsewhere. But even here, amidst the sea of cubicles, Michael could feel the weight of the expectations pressing down on him. He was supposed to prove himself, to show that he had the fire to succeed. The fire that Edwards had seen in him, but which Michael now feared he might not have. The first few hours were a blur. His new colleagues barely acknowledged him, absorbed in their own tasks. Michael could see the relentless pace of the office already taking its toll on those around him. Phones rang constantly. Meetings were scheduled, rescheduled, and then pushed again. The pressure in the air was palpable, an invisible current that seemed to carry everyone along at a breakneck speed. It was a world where no one had time to slow down, where everything was urgent, where every move could either take you forward or break you apart. By lunchtime, Michael had already been handed 3 different projects. The demands were high. Every task Edwards assigned felt like a test that had no room for error. The smallest mistakes were met with sharp criticism, and Michael found himself walking on eggshells, afraid to make the wrong move. "Michael, this isn't good enough," Edwards' voice had come over the phone an hour after Michael had submitted his first report. "You had all day to get this right and you still couldn't pull it off? I thought you had more fire than this." Michael's stomach had tightened at the sound of Edwards' voice. The words stung more than they should have. He knew this was the game Edwards played, pushing, testing, breaking, and building. But it didn't make it easier to hear. The world he had stepped into wasn't kind. It wasn't forgiving. The pace continued to build. The hours blurred together, and Michael found himself working late into the night. His mind raced through the tasks at hand, the spreadsheets, the reports, the endless demands from his boss. Each project felt like it had to be perfect, and yet perfection was always just out of reach. The harder he tried, the more mistakes seemed to surface. He could feel his confidence slipping with every error. The emotional toll of these first days was heavier than Michael had ever imagined. By the second night, Michael was on his third cup of coffee, trying to keep his eyes open as he stared at the screen in front of him. His body ached from the long hours, his head was pounding, and his thoughts felt sluggish, foggy. Every email he sent, every phone call he made, felt like a monumental task. But Edwards had set the bar impossibly high. There was no room for weakness here. The pressure to perform was suffocating. But it wasn't just the work that was wearing him down. It was the constant fear that he didn't belong here. He had never been this far out of his depth. There were no friends to confide in, no one to talk to. His phone had gone silent since the first few days, his old friends too busy with their own lives to check in. His parents had no idea what he was doing or how bad things were. The world outside his cubicle felt distant, like a life he could never reach. In the rare moments when he allowed himself to rest, Michael would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, anxiety tightening its grip on his chest. What if I'm not cut out for this? What if I fail? Sleep came in fits and starts, but when he woke, it was always to the same gnawing dread. The voice in his head would ask the same question. What if I'm not good enough? The worst part? He was beginning to believe it. The next night, when he thought he couldn't take any more, he found himself staring at his phone. A message from Edwards. The screen lit up in the dim light of the office. You're doing well, but you're not there yet. Let's see how far you can go. Michael's heart pounded as he read the words again. This time, it wasn't a critique. It wasn't an accusation. It was a challenge. And Michael knew that deep down, this was everything. The relentless pressure, the unyielding demands. It was all part of the game Edwards played. A game that would either break him or force him to rise. But the message was clear. Edwards was watching. Always watching. Waiting to see if Michael could prove himself. It motivated him, yes, but it also terrified him. The expectations had gone from high to astronomical. This wasn't just a test of his skills, it was a test of his very character. Could he survive in this world? Could he push himself beyond what he thought he was capable of? Michael closed his eyes for a moment, his heart racing. I have to prove myself. I can't quit now. But just as he was about to dive back into the work, Edwards' words echoed in his mind. Let's see how far you can go. The following morning, after another sleepless night, Edwards had a new challenge waiting for him. Michael was called into his office, the familiar feeling of anxiety returning to his chest as he stepped through the door. Edwards was sitting behind his desk, looking as unflappable as ever. His eyes locked onto Michael's with that calculating intensity. I need you to lead the presentation for our new product launch, Edwards said, his voice unwavering. It's a high-stakes presentation, Michael. You'll be presenting in front of our top executives, including the board. No room for error. Do it right, and it could change everything for you. But if you fail... His words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Michael's breath caught in his throat. This was it. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment where he either stepped up or collapsed under the weight of the pressure. His palms were slick with sweat, his mind racing. He had never presented to a room full of executives before. The very idea of standing in front of them, all eyes on him, filled him with a sense of dread. But there was no choice. The opportunity was too big. I'll do it, Michael said, his voice steadier than he felt. Edwards studied him for a moment before nodding slowly. Good. I'll be watching. As Michael turned to leave the office, his heart thudded in his chest. The task ahead of him seemed insurmountable, but he knew one thing. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment where he either proved himself or became just another failure in a long line of people who couldn't hack it in Edward's world. His hands trembled as he sat back down at his desk. The stakes were higher than ever. The clock was ticking. And Michael had no idea how he was going to pull this off. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let this chance slip through his fingers. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. The morning of the presentation arrived, and the weight of the challenge hit Michael like a sledgehammer. His mind was a storm of nerves and doubts, the image of the boardroom replaying in his head over and over. Every failure, every mistake he'd made in the last few weeks seemed to haunt him. He could see them all, the missed emails, the rushed reports, the tasks that Edwards had criticized him for, and the lingering feeling that he wasn't measuring up. But none of that mattered now. Today was different. Today, he had one shot to prove everything. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Michael sat at his desk, staring at the PowerPoint slides that had consumed his thoughts for days. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but his mind was far from the task at hand. Instead of focusing, he kept imagining the room full of powerful executives, all of them watching, waiting for him to screw up. He had to get it right. He couldn't afford to fail. But what if he wasn't ready? What if all his mistakes were a sign that he didn't belong here? The pressure was suffocating. His phone buzzed. Another message from Edwards. "How's the presentation coming along?" the text read. Michael's stomach churned. It felt like an interrogation more than an inquiry. "How's the presentation?" He didn't know how to answer. He was still tweaking the slides, still trying to make the content perfect. But there was no time for that. He had only a few hours to pull it all together, and Edwards had made it clear that perfection wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Michael had been preparing all week, every waking hour consumed with trying to get everything right. But there was no room for error in this world. If he stumbled, if he flinched, it could all come crashing down. He paced around his cubicle, trying to shake the anxiety that was tightening around his chest. This was supposed to be his big moment. He had been given a chance, no, an opportunity, to prove himself. But how? Was this truly the test that would define his future? Was he ready to walk into that room and face the relentless gaze of the top executives? He kept running through his slides in his mind. He had researched the product launch inside and out. He had memorized every statistic, every market trend. He had prepared for every question they could throw at him. But what if it wasn't enough? He could almost hear Edward's voice. "The world doesn't care about your excuses. It cares about results. Do you have what it takes?" Michael hated that feeling. The constant weight of expectation. It wasn't just the pressure to succeed. It was the fear of disappointing Edwards, of letting him down. He had gone so far out of his comfort zone for this, but now that it was time to deliver, all he could feel was the weight of every single one of his insecurities. The clock was ticking. Then, just as he was about to dive back into his work, the phone buzzed again. Another text from Edwards. "I'll be in the conference room at 2 p.m. sharp. Don't be late." Michael closed his eyes, trying to calm the storm inside his head. 2 p.m. sharp. It was more than just a meeting. It was the moment that would shape everything. The moment that could either launch him into success or drown him in failure. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly noon. He had 2 hours to gather himself. Michael grabbed his jacket and headed to the small cafe downstairs to clear his head. The outside air was cool, and the bustling city seemed so far away from the pressures he was facing. He tried to drink his coffee, but the bitter taste didn't do much to calm his nerves. His thoughts kept spiraling. He couldn't shake the image of Edwards watching him, observing every move, every word, waiting for him to fall. The fire that had burned inside him when he made that sarcastic tweet about Edwards seemed like a distant memory now. The anger and frustration had been replaced by an insurmountable fear of failure. But Michael knew he couldn't stay in this spiral. He had to turn it around. What had Edwards said when they first met? Fire without direction will burn everything down. Michael needed to remember that. He needed to channel that fire, to direct it, to use it as fuel to prove himself. This wasn't just about impressing Edwards. This was about proving to himself that he had what it took, that he could stand in front of this room full of powerful people and not just survive, but thrive. He took a deep breath and opened his laptop. The slides stared back at him, familiar but now filled with the weight of his self-doubt. But he didn't have time for doubt. He couldn't afford it. He pulled up the first slide. It was a simple statistic about the market potential for their new product, but it was powerful, a driving force behind everything they had worked for. Michael knew the numbers. He knew the product inside and out. Now, it was time to speak with authority. He began practicing his delivery out loud. He forced the words out, each one carrying more weight than the last. With each line, he began to feel something shift inside him. This was his chance. He could do this. The minutes ticked by, and soon it was time. He gathered his things and walked to the conference room. His legs felt like lead, but he kept walking. Don't let them see you sweat. When he entered, the executives were already seated. There were 6 of them, their faces unreadable. At the head of the table was Edwards, his piercing blue eyes locked onto Michael as he walked in. Michael stood tall, forcing himself to breathe steadily. He had worked too hard for this moment to falter now. "Mr. Wilson, take a seat," Edwards said, his voice smooth but commanding. Michael nodded, sitting at the table. He could feel the eyes of the executives on him, their silent judgment weighing heavily in the room. He opened his laptop and began. The words came out more smoothly than he expected. With each passing slide, Michael felt himself gaining momentum. He spoke with confidence about the product's potential, its unique market position, and how they plan to capitalize on upcoming trends. His delivery wasn't perfect, but it was strong. He was starting to own the room. The executives asked questions, some challenging, some probing. But Michael didn't stumble. He answered each one with clarity, feeling the fire inside him reignite with each word. His earlier panic was replaced by a sense of determination. This was his moment, and he was going to own it. Edwards watched silently, his expression inscrutable. But Michael could feel it. He could feel the shift in the room. The executives were paying attention. They were listening. By the time Michael reached the final slide, he was drenched in sweat, but his heart was pounding with adrenaline. The presentation wasn't perfect, but it was good. He had delivered. He had shown them that he could handle the pressure. The room fell silent for a moment before Edwards leaned forward, his piercing gaze locked onto Michael's. "Well done, Mr. Wilson," he said, his tone surprisingly approving. "You didn't do this for me, Michael. You did it for yourself." Michael exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The weight that had been pressing on his chest lifted, if only for a moment. In that instant, Michael understood something he hadn't before. The presentation wasn't about impressing Edwards or the executives. It wasn't even about proving to them that he belonged in this world. It was about proving to himself that he could face this challenge, that he could push through the fear, the pressure, and the doubt. He had learned something far more important. The value wasn't in the result. It was in the process. He had been given a chance, and he had stepped up. And for the first time since he'd walked into Edwards Enterprises, Michael believed that maybe, just maybe, he had what it took to make it in this world. As Edwards gave him a small but approving nod, Michael couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And the game was just getting started. The days following Michael's successful presentation felt like a fever dream. He had survived the ultimate test and, for the first time in his life, felt a glimmer of validation. But something in the back of his mind kept nagging him. Edwards's words, the praise, the approval, they all felt real, but also distant, like something he couldn't quite grasp. He knew he had earned this moment, but was it enough to change his life? The next morning, Michael woke up earlier than usual. His apartment felt quieter than it ever had before, as if the world had paused and left him alone to process everything. He stretched his limbs, the weight of the previous day's success still heavy in his chest. He had achieved something significant, but there was still an unease in him, a hunger that had only deepened. As he made his way to Edwards Enterprises that morning, his thoughts wandered back to his earlier failures, the countless job interviews where he had walked out feeling invisible, the hopeless days spent staring at rejection emails, and the growing resentment that had consumed him over the years. He'd been lost in frustration and bitterness, and the path he had taken had led him here, to this brutal, high-stakes environment. And yet, here he was. A jobless graduate just a few months ago, now sitting across from one of the most powerful CEOs in the world. His journey had been anything but straightforward. Every failure had led him to this moment, every rejection, every misstep. They hadn't broken him. They had shaped him. In that moment of clarity, he realized how much he had grown, how much his past had prepared him for this. The fire he had once felt was now tempered. It wasn't the chaotic anger and frustration that had driven his sharp tweets or harsh words. It was a focused, purposeful drive. A drive to build, to create, to carve out his own place in this world. As Michael entered the office building, he saw the familiar sleek architecture of Edwards Enterprises. The polished floors, the cutting-edge technology, and the aura of power in every corner reminded him that this wasn't just a place of business. This was a battleground. And he had learned in the last few weeks that he could survive it. He could thrive in it. But to do that, he would have to learn the real lessons, the ones Edwards had tried to teach him. Michael took his seat at his desk, looking out of the window at the bustling city below. It was surreal, really. A part of him had once resented the world he was now stepping into. He had hated the world of the ultra-wealthy, the billionaires who flaunted their success like a badge of honor. But now, he realized it wasn't about the wealth. It wasn't about the flashy cars or the sprawling mansions. It was about something deeper. It was about building something real. Edwards wasn't the arrogant, untouchable billionaire Michael had imagined. He was tough, relentless, and at times, unyielding. But there was something else beneath it all. Edwards had built his empire from the ground up, and it was that same mentality, that unwavering commitment to building, that Michael had to embrace. Success, true success, didn't come from wishing or waiting. It came from creating, from rolling up your sleeves and putting in the work, from learning how to fail and get back up. Michael had spent so much of his life looking at the surface of things, the shiny accomplishments, the apparent ease with which people like Edwards achieved success. But now, he saw it for what it was, a reflection of countless hours of struggle, failure, and sacrifice. It wasn't just about making money. It was about the ability to create something meaningful, something that mattered. Whether it was a product, a company, or a vision, it was the act of building that made success real. The realization hit him like a wave, crashing over everything he thought he knew about success. It wasn't about the destination, it was about the journey. And Edwards, for all his tough love approach, was the guide he needed to help him navigate it. Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the skyline ahead. He had spent years chasing the wrong things, looking for validation in all the wrong places. But now he knew the truth. He had to build something for himself first. As the days passed, the fog of doubt that had clouded his mind began to lift. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was beginning to live, to create, to shape his future. The world Edwards had introduced him to, a world of ruthless competition and unrelenting pressure, no longer felt like a trap. It felt like an opportunity, but that didn't mean the pressure had gone away. If anything, it was intensifying. Michael spent the next few days reflecting on his journey. He sat down one evening, after finishing a long day of meetings and tasks, and began to write. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to put it all down, but something inside him urged him to do so. I have always felt invisible. As a kid, as a student, even as a job seeker, I have always been the one left behind. The one whose applications were ignored, whose resumes were never read. I thought that the world was against me, that the system was designed for people like Edwards and not for people like me. I thought I was entitled to success, that my degree should have been enough to get me what I wanted. But the truth is, I never learned how to build anything. Michael paused, reading his words. I never learned how to fail and keep going. I never learned how to use my frustration as fuel to move forward. He looked down at the page, realizing how much he had changed in such a short period of time. His failures hadn't defined him. They had refined him. Every rejection, every late-night struggle, every disappointing interview, they had taught him something he needed to learn. They had shaped him into the person he was now. He closed the notebook, feeling the weight of his own transformation. He wasn't just chasing success anymore. He was starting to understand it, starting to build it from the ground up. As the weeks went on, Michael's relationship with Edwards shifted. At first, it had been transactional. The billionaire CEO offering him a chance to prove himself, and Michael trying to keep up. But now, it was different. Edwards wasn't just a boss. He was becoming a mentor. A tough one, but a mentor nonetheless. Michael found himself seeking out Edwards more often, not just for work-related tasks, but for guidance. He would stop by Edwards' office to ask for advice or share his thoughts on a project, and each time Edwards would push him further. You're getting better, Michael, but you're not there yet, Edwards would say. Success isn't about doing one thing right. It's about doing everything right, and doing it over and over again. So what's your next move? There was no hand-holding in Edwards' world, but Michael didn't need it anymore. He was starting to see the value in Edwards' tough approach. It wasn't about being coddled. It was about being challenged, about being pushed to go further, to take on more, and to prove that he was worthy of success. One day, Edwards looked at him, his eyes sharp as ever. You're starting to get it, he said. You've learned how to get out of your own way. Now, show me what you can do with what you've got. Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he simply nodded. For the first time, he understood what Edwards had been trying to teach him all along. This wasn't just about working hard. It was about using everything. His failures, his mistakes, his frustrations, to fuel his success. He wasn't just Michael, the jobless graduate anymore. He was someone who was beginning to build something meaningful, and he wasn't going to stop until he had created something of his own. The realization hit him with a quiet force, and for the first time he felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next. Ready to build his own path, one step at a time. As the day drew to a close, Michael stood by the window in his office, looking out at the sprawling city below. His journey had only just begun, but now he knew that success was within his reach. It wasn't about luck or chance. It was about learning, growing, and building. Building something real, something that would last. The fire inside him burned brighter now, no longer a flame of frustration but a beacon of purpose. And this time, he was ready to let it guide him. The first week of Michael's new project felt like a storm that had swept through him, leaving no room for hesitation, no time to breathe. He had been assigned to lead the team on a high-stakes product launch that could make or break the company's next quarter. The pressure was suffocating, and the weight of it hung on his shoulders like an invisible force. But there was something different this time. For the first time since joining Edwards Enterprises, Michael felt a strange sense of clarity. A fire that had once burned with frustration now simmered with focused determination. Edwards's voice echoed in his head. Success is not a gift, Michael. It's a demand. You're not here to survive. You're here to thrive. Michael had absorbed every word Edwards had said to him, every challenge, every test. It wasn't just about proving his worth to Edwards anymore. It was about proving to himself that he had the resilience, the grit, to not just take charge, but to lead. He wasn't that jobless graduate anymore, the one who had mocked a millionaire from his isolated apartment, desperate and bitter. Now, he was someone different. He had a purpose, a vision, and most importantly, he had the tools to turn that vision into reality. The project was massive. A new app launch, the company's most ambitious product to date. It promised to revolutionize their sector, and the competition was fierce. Edwards had placed all his trust in Michael, a graduate with no real-world experience in leadership, to make sure everything went smoothly. The stakes couldn't have been higher. His team consisted of seasoned professionals, some older than him, some with decades of experience. Yet Michael found himself leading them with confidence, directing the flow of meetings, assigning tasks, and holding everyone accountable. The first few days were a whirlwind, with countless meetings, long hours, and endless amounts of data to process. But Michael thrived under the pressure. It wasn't just the endless work that fueled him. It was the fact that for the first time he saw a glimpse of what he could be. Every decision, no matter how small, felt like a piece of the puzzle. Every minor victory, every challenge overcome, solidified his belief in his ability to lead. Edwards had tested him in ways he didn't think he could survive, but this was different. This was his moment. The meetings were grueling, the critiques sharp. Michael knew he was being watched. Edwards wasn't physically present for every single one, but Michael could feel his presence looming, like an unseen force, ensuring that every decision he made was the right one. The pressure to perform was constant, but it didn't break him. It fueled him. There was something undeniably transformative in the way Michael handled the project. He found himself confronting problems with ease, thinking through solutions without second-guessing himself. The self-doubt that once crept into his thoughts was now silenced by his newfound confidence. He had learned how to manage the overwhelming weight of responsibility, how to navigate the delicate balance of leadership, between motivating his team and holding them accountable, between knowing when to take charge and when to step back. In the course of his leadership, Michael's team had become more than just colleagues. They had become his allies, each person contributing their expertise, their own piece of the puzzle. And Michael, for the first time, was the one holding everything together. The once jobless graduate was now a leader, a force to be reckoned with. But Edwards had always said that success came at a cost, and Michael was beginning to understand that the real test was yet to come. 3 weeks into the project, everything began to build toward a critical moment. The launch date was fast approaching, and Michael's team was beginning to feel the weight of the deadline. The pressure was mounting with every passing day. All of the work, all the late nights, the missed meals, and endless revisions had come down to this one moment. It was then that Edwards called Michael into his office. "Close the door," Edwards said as Michael stepped in. His tone was calm, yet there was an edge to it that immediately put Michael on alert. Michael sat across from Edwards, the room unusually silent. Edwards studied him for a long moment, his piercing blue eyes never leaving Michael's face. "Let me get straight to it," Edwards said. "The project is on track. Your leadership has been impressive, but I have one last test for you." Michael's heart skipped a beat. He had thought he was past the tests, past the challenges. But there was something in Edwards' eyes that told him this would be different. "You've done well," Edwards continued, his voice colder now. "But this last phase of the launch will require a decision. A big one. You'll need to choose between two options." Michael's brow furrowed, his pulse quickening. Edward's words always carried weight, and he knew whatever came next would be the ultimate challenge. "There's a strategy to ensure the app's success," Edwards explained. "One that's safe, conservative. We'd release the app as planned with minimal risk. The market's demand is guaranteed, and we would see immediate returns. The other option is riskier, but it could propel us ahead of the competition if we push the envelope, take the risk, and make a bolder move." Michael listened carefully, trying to absorb the gravity of the situation. "You'll have to choose, Michael," Edwards said, his gaze intense. "The safe route or the risk. But remember, this isn't about making the right choice for me. This is about making the right choice for you." The words hung in the air. Edwards was challenging him in a way Michael had never been challenged before. This wasn't about playing it safe. It wasn't about staying within the lines. Edwards wanted to see if Michael was willing to take a chance, to risk it all for something greater. Michael's mind raced. The safe route promised security, but the risk promised something much more. This was the kind of decision that could define his career, and, in some ways, define him as a person. He thought about everything he had learned, all the lessons Edwards had instilled in him. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about comfort. It was about pushing forward, about embracing the challenge, no matter how dangerous it might be. "Make the call, Michael," Edwards urged. "I'm not going to hold your hand on this one. You've been prepared. The question is, are you ready?" The weight of the moment settled on Michael's shoulders like a heavy mantle. He could feel the weight of his team's expectations, the gravity of the decision ahead, but it was clear now. There was only one choice he could make. Without hesitation, Michael stood up, his decision clear. He wasn't the man who had mocked a millionaire from the sidelines anymore. He was a leader, and leaders took risks. "I'm going with the bold move," Michael said, his voice steady, unwavering. "It's the only way to truly move forward." Edward's lips curled into a small, approving smile. "Good choice. It'll either make you or break you, Michael. But that's how it goes. You've learned that by now." Michael nodded. He was no longer just a jobless graduate. He had become something more. He had taken the risk, and now there was no turning back. As Michael walked out of Edwards's office, his heart was racing. He had chosen the risk, and with it, he had chosen to take full responsibility for his future. This wasn't just about proving something to Edwards. It was about proving something to himself. He wasn't afraid of failure anymore. He wasn't afraid to push forward when everyone else might have hesitated. The weight of the decision wasn't gone, but it didn't feel as heavy as it once would have. Michael knew that whatever came next, he was ready. The man who had once been paralyzed by fear and self-doubt was now standing at the edge of his destiny, and it was only a matter of time before he would leap. Michael was no longer the outsider. He was part of this world, fully immersed in the grind, the struggle, and the glory of ambition. His journey had only just begun, but now he had the tools, the mindset, and the fire to succeed. This was the moment that would define him, and no matter what the outcome, Michael was ready for whatever came next. The weight of the past few months had been intense, but now it felt like a distant memory. Michael could hardly remember the anxiety and sleepless nights that had plagued him when he first stepped into Edwards Enterprises. He remembered the cold sweats, the constant self-doubt, the sinking feeling that he wasn't good enough for this world of ruthless ambition. But that was then. This was now. The product launch had been a success, a resounding one. The bold, high-risk decision that Michael had made had paid off. The app exceeded all expectations, and Edwards was visibly impressed. The company's stock had surged, and Michael's leadership had been the catalyst for the growth. It wasn't just the product's success that mattered. It was the way Michael had handled the pressure, the relentless demands, and the endless barrage of criticisms. He had emerged from the experience not just as a leader, but as someone who had found his own strength. When the project was complete, the sense of relief Michael felt was overwhelming. He had faced his biggest test yet, and he had passed with flying colors. The team that had once looked at him with skepticism now respected him. They no longer saw him as the jobless graduate, the outsider, but as one of their own, a valued member of the team who had proven himself time and time again. The changes in Michael were undeniable. His posture was straighter now, his demeanor more confident. The nervousness that had once held him back was gone, replaced with a quiet assurance. He was no longer the person he had been when he first walked into the office, desperate and unsure. Edwards had seen the transformation too. The man who had once been skeptical of Michael's potential now looked at him with an approving eye. Michael wasn't just a project anymore. He was a product of the system Edwards had created. A system built on hard work, resilience, and the ability to take risks. But Michael hadn't just followed Edwards' methods. He had made them his own, adapting them to suit his strengths and weaknesses. He had become something more than just a reflection of his mentor. He had become an independent force in his own right. The office, once a place of endless dread, now felt like a second home to Michael. He walked through its glass doors with a sense of pride. He was part of something bigger, something that stretched beyond the daily grind of work. He was contributing, shaping, leading. The weight of his past struggles, the months of rejection, the feeling of being invisible, the nagging voice of self-doubt, no longer held him back. In its place was a sense of purpose. Michael had built a future for himself, and it was one that he knew he deserved. His once fragile sense of self-worth had been replaced by something stronger, self-respect. Every day now felt like a new opportunity to grow, and with every challenge, Michael felt more and more capable. He didn't just want to succeed for the sake of success. He wanted to prove that his success wasn't just a result of luck or chance, it was earned. But as much as he had accomplished, Michael knew that his journey was far from over. It was a Friday afternoon when Edwards summoned him to his office. The room was familiar now, not intimidating, but still charged with an energy that made Michael's heart beat faster whenever he entered. As usual, Edwards was sitting behind his desk, the cityscape of Chicago visible through the massive windows behind him. "Michael," Edwards said, his tone calm but authoritative. "Come in." "Close the door." Michael did as instructed, his pulse quickening. What was this about? Had something gone wrong? He had been on a high since the success of the project, but he knew that Edwards didn't operate on the same emotional wavelength as most people. If Edwards called him in now, it could only mean one thing: a new challenge. "You've done well," Edwards continued, leaning back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. "The product launch exceeded expectations, and your leadership was key in that success. But more than that, I've seen a shift in you. You've grown, Michael. I've watched you transform before my eyes." Michael swallowed, trying to steady his nerves. He wasn't sure if he should be relieved or apprehensive. The praise felt good, but he knew Edwards wasn't the type to offer compliments without reason. "You've earned my respect," Edwards added, his voice steady. "And I'm sure you've earned the respect of those around you. But now I want to see if you can take the next step. I have an opportunity for you." Michael's heart skipped a beat. What was Edwards talking about? Edwards stood up and walked around his desk, his movements purposeful. "There's a new project coming down the pipeline, Michael. A big one. The company is expanding and we need someone who can take charge of the direction we're heading. Someone with vision. Someone who can lead a team and drive the company forward." Michael's mind raced. A new project? Lead a team? Was Edwards really suggesting that Michael would be at the helm of something that big? "I'm offering you the chance to run your own team," Edwards said, as if reading Michael's thoughts. "To take the lead on a new venture that could change the way we do business. You'll be responsible for shaping the team, developing the strategy, and executing it. You'll be the one calling the shots." Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. This was everything he had dreamed of, everything he had fought for. But now that it was in front of him, he wasn't sure how to respond. "You'll have complete control over your team," Edwards continued, his eyes locking with Michael's. "I want to see if you can take the lessons you've learned here and apply them to something new. This is your chance to prove that you're not just some hired hand. You're someone who can lead, someone who can shape the future of this company." Michael was silent for a long moment. The weight of Edwards's words settled on his shoulders like a mantle of responsibility. This wasn't just a job offer, this was a test of everything he had learned, everything he had become. The silence between them stretched out, heavy with meaning. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice steady but filled with a newfound certainty. "I'm ready," he said. "I won't let you down." Edwards nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I know you won't. But remember, Michael, this won't be easy. It'll be your hardest challenge yet. But if you can handle this, there's nothing you can't do." Michael felt a surge of excitement, but also a hint of fear. The responsibility was immense. The opportunity was incredible. But he knew deep down that this was exactly what he had been working for. This was the next step in his journey, the one that would define him as a leader. Edwards's words echoed in his mind. "If you can handle this, there's nothing you can't do." Michael wasn't the jobless graduate anymore. He wasn't the underdog fighting to prove himself. He was a leader now, and this was his moment. As he walked out of Edwards's office, Michael felt a wave of emotions crash over him. He had come so far, and yet he knew this was only the beginning. The challenge ahead would be unlike anything he had faced before, but he was ready. He thought back to the days when he had mocked Edwards, when he had been consumed by bitterness and frustration. He remembered how he had questioned everything, how he had felt lost and powerless. But now, looking at where he was standing, no longer the man who had cursed the system, but the one who was about to shape it, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The journey had come full circle. From the jobless graduate sitting in his apartment, scrolling through job listings, to the man standing in Edwards' office, being handed the keys to his future. He had made it. But the road ahead was still long, and he knew that he would have to keep fighting, keep learning, keep pushing forward. As Michael stepped out into the bright sunlight of the Chicago skyline, he felt a sense of hope that had eluded him for so long. The future was his, and nothing was beyond his reach. The journey had only just begun. Michael sat at his desk, his fingers hovering above the keyboard, the screen in front of him a blur of documents, emails, and charts. It was a typical Monday, but it no longer felt that way. His office, once just a small, barely personalized cubicle, had transformed into something more fitting of his new status. The walls now adorned with a few awards and framed photographs, reminders of his journey, the long road from jobless graduate to key player in a billion-dollar company. He had earned his place here. There was no doubt about it. The past few months had been nothing short of a crucible, shaping him into someone entirely different from the man who had once mocked Matthew Edwards on social media. But now, sitting at his desk, Michael realized that his journey wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about proving his worth or earning a seat at the table. It was about what he could do for others. Michael had come full circle, from a position of desperation, frustration, and envy to one of leadership, responsibility, and influence. The transition wasn't easy. There were still moments when the weight of the responsibility threatened to crush him. There were times when doubt crept in, whispering in his ear that maybe he didn't belong in this new world, this world of power and success. But then he thought about the people who had helped him along the way. Edwards, who had pushed him to his limits and beyond, who had seen something in him that he hadn't seen in himself. and the team that had come together under his leadership, who had worked late nights alongside him, each person contributing their own piece to the success of the projects they worked on. And now, it was time for Michael to take on the mantle of leadership. He was no longer the one struggling to find his way. He was the one who could help others do the same. "Michael, got a minute?" A voice called out from the doorway, interrupting his thoughts. It was Lisa, one of the junior associates on his team. Michael had worked with her for the past few weeks, helping her adjust to the company's fast-paced environment. She'd been hesitant at first, unsure of her place in such a high-stakes world. But over time, Michael had seen the spark of potential in her, and now it was his job to guide her, just as Edwards had guided him. "Of course," Michael said, looking up from his desk. "Come in." Lisa entered, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. She was carrying a folder, and Michael could tell she had something important to discuss. He gestured for her to sit. "I wanted to talk to you about the upcoming project," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I've been going through the materials, and there's a part of the presentation I'm not sure about. I don't want to mess it up, but I feel like I'm missing something." Michael nodded. He had been there. He remembered what it was like to be on the other side of that desk, overwhelmed by the sheer pressure of trying to get everything right. But what had helped him wasn't just advice or strategies. It had been the knowledge that someone believed in him, that someone had taken the time to invest in his growth. "I've been where you are," Michael said, leaning forward slightly. "When I first joined this company, I was terrified. I thought I was going to fail every day. But then I learned that the key isn't to get everything right from the start. The key is to keep moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers." Lisa listened intently, her eyes brightening. "But how do you know when you've got it right?" "Sometimes you don't know until you take the risk," Michael replied. "But you'll never know unless you trust yourself. Trust that you've learned what you need to get the job done. And trust that if you do make a mistake, you'll have the strength to recover." There was a long pause as Lisa absorbed his words. Michael could see the weight lifting off her shoulders. She didn't need a magic formula. What she needed was someone who had walked the path she was on and could show her the way. "That's really helpful," Lisa said, a grateful smile spreading across her face. "I'll keep that in mind. Thanks, Michael." "You're welcome," Michael replied, standing up and walking around his desk to shake her hand. "And if you ever need help with anything, don't hesitate to reach out. We're all in this together." As Lisa left his office, Michael couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. He wasn't just succeeding for himself anymore. He was helping others to succeed. He was part of a team, a family, and together they were building something lasting. It was a new role, one that came with its own set of challenges, but it was a role he was ready to embrace. Impact on others. The transformation in Michael had been noticeable, but it wasn't just his career that had been elevated. His presence within the company had begun to have a ripple effect on others. The junior associates, the new hires, and even some of the more seasoned employees were watching him, seeing how he handled the pressure, how he faced challenges, and how he led his team. And for many of them, Michael had become a symbol of what was possible. In the past, Michael had seen people like Edwards, powerful, confident, and untouchable. But now he saw himself in that light. He wasn't just the guy sitting at the bottom anymore. He was someone people looked to for guidance and inspiration, and that responsibility weighed heavily on him. But it also pushed him to be better. Every conversation with a team member, every challenge he faced, was an opportunity to rise above. It wasn't just about his own success anymore. It was about helping others realize their potential, just as Edwards had helped him realize his. One day, after a particularly grueling meeting, Michael was walking back to his office when he bumped into Marcus, one of the more senior engineers on the team. Marcus had been one of the people who had initially doubted Michael's ability to handle the pressure. But now, things were different. "Hey, Michael," Marcus called out, catching up to him. Got a second? Sure, Michael said, turning to face him. What's up? I just wanted to say, I've been watching you, Marcus said, his voice thoughtful. The way you've handled everything, the projects, the pressure, the team, it's impressive. You've come a long way, man. Michael felt a warmth spread through him at the unexpected praise. Marcus wasn't someone who handed out compliments easily, so hearing this meant a lot. Thanks, Marcus, Michael said, nodding. I've learned a lot from the people around me, Edwards especially. He's been a big influence on me. I can see that, Marcus said with a slight grin. But you've taken it to another level. I think you're ready for more than just managing a team. I'm sure Edwards has noticed. Michael raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Marcus glanced around, ensuring no one was listening. I'm just saying, you've got the skills, the drive, and the leadership potential. You could be running your own department someday, maybe even more. Michael was taken aback by the comment. He hadn't considered it. But as the words sank in, he realized that Marcus was right. He had come a long way, and maybe he was ready for something bigger. You think so? Michael asked, his voice low. Absolutely, Marcus said, his tone firm. You've proven yourself to be more than just a survivor in this game. You're a leader, and I think people are starting to notice. Michael stood there for a moment, processing the conversation. It felt surreal to hear those words coming from someone like Marcus. But it also lit a fire inside him. Maybe the sky was the limit after all. Later that afternoon, Michael received an email from Edwards. It was brief, but its implications were clear. Michael, I'd like to discuss your future with the company. Meet me in my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Matthew Edwards. Michael's heart skipped a beat. What was this about? Had Edwards noticed something he hadn't? Was this the opportunity Marcus had hinted at? The next morning, Michael walked into Edwards' office with a sense of anticipation. The room was as imposing as ever. The sleek furniture, the stunning view, all reminders of the power Edwards held. But now Michael didn't feel so small in the presence of this man. He had earned his place here. Michael, Edwards said, standing as Michael entered. Come in. Sit down. Michael sat, his pulse quickening. This was it. Whatever was about to happen would shape the next chapter of his career. I've been thinking a lot about your performance over the last few months, Edwards began, his voice steady. You've taken on every challenge with a level of grace and determination that I didn't expect. Michael smiled nervously, waiting for Edwards to continue. You've proven yourself in every way that matters, Edwards said. And now I'm offering you a chance to take on a bigger role. I want you to oversee the next phase of our expansion. You'll lead a team of your own and help guide the direction of the company's future growth. Michael's eyes widened. Was he hearing this correctly? You're ready, Michael, Edwards continued. You've earned it. The only question is, will you step up? Michael's heart pounded in his chest. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He had worked so hard to get here, to earn this moment. And now it was his choice. Yes, Michael said, his voice steady. I'm ready. Edwards smiled, a rare, approving smile. Good. Let's make it happen. As Michael left Edwards' office, the weight of the moment hit him all over again. He had made it. And now, he would help others do the same. This was only the beginning. Michael sat at his desk, the hum of the office surrounding him, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The world outside the towering glass windows of the skyscraper was bustling, full of energy and ambition. But inside his mind, everything had slowed to a crawl. His eyes drifted over the framed awards and company accolades hanging on the walls, a stark contrast to the lonely room he'd once occupied in a rundown apartment, battling against the constant hum of rejection. How had he gotten here? The journey seemed like a lifetime ago, yet it had unfolded in such a short time. He thought back to the tweet that had started it all. That moment of frustration and anger had led him into a world that had both terrified and exhilarated him. The tweet had been a mistake, a knee-jerk reaction to the social media display of a billionaire's life. Michael hadn't known what to expect when he mocked Matthew Edwards, the powerful CEO, in his usual online outrage. He certainly hadn't expected the response that changed everything, an invitation to meet, to discuss, to learn. It was easy to see it now. Edwards had seen something in him, a rawness, a fire that needed to be controlled, a potential that he could mold. But that wasn't the only thing Michael had gained from those first nerve-wracking weeks. He had learned to push past the walls he'd built for himself, the ones he'd erected out of fear, self-doubt, and a deep sense of inadequacy. Every project he'd worked on, every late-night deadline, and every mistake made had been an opportunity to grow, to learn, to evolve. When he had walked into Edward's office for the first time, his mind had been consumed by the uncertainty of it all. But now, months later, the uncertainty had become familiar, even comfortable. He was no longer running from it. He embraced it. Michael's life had changed in ways he could have never imagined. He had gone from jobless graduate to CEO-level confidant. He was no longer the young man who had mocked the world of the rich and successful. He was now a part of that world, shaping its future. Looking back, Michael could hardly recognize the person he had been. That man, full of resentment, felt like someone from another lifetime. He remembered the hunger in his stomach, the emptiness in his heart. His old self would have never imagined the path he was walking now. He would have laughed at the thought of leading multi-million-dollar projects, working alongside some of the most powerful figures in business. But here he was, at the peak of a mountain he hadn't even realized he was climbing. A leader in the company he had once resented, with a seat at the table he had never believed he deserved. Michael knew the transformation wasn't just about his career. It was about who he had become. Someone who could look in the mirror and say with conviction, "I did this. I earned this." His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his reverie. He picked it up to find a text message from Edwards. "Meeting at 3 p.m. Don't be late." Michael smiled at the message, now so familiar in its simplicity. Matthew Edwards had become more than just his boss. In many ways, Edwards had been a mentor, a guide through a world that was not for the faint of heart. But it had also been Michael's drive and determination that had ultimately pushed him over the edge. The fire that Edwards had seen in him, the same fire that had started with a single tweet, had burned brightly, pushing him to places he hadn't thought possible. Still, Michael knew the game wasn't over. In this world, it never was. The conference room was silent as Michael walked in, taking his place at the head of the table. He looked around at the group of executives who were now his peers, their faces reflecting a mixture of respect and expectation. He had earned his seat at this table, and he knew it. Edwards was already seated, his usual air of calm authority filling the room. He gave Michael a nod as he sat down, his piercing blue eyes betraying no emotion. "You've done well, Michael," Edwards said, breaking the silence. "The project was a success. The company is heading in the right direction thanks to your leadership." Michael nodded in acknowledgement, though he couldn't help but feel a wave of pride at the compliment. The project had been his first real test as a leader, and it had gone well, very well. But the feeling of accomplishment was fleeting. He knew this was only the beginning. Success didn't last forever in this world. You had to keep pushing, keep striving, keep proving that you were worthy of your place. "Thanks," Michael said, his voice steady but full of conviction. "But it's not just me, it's the team. They've worked just as hard, and we did it together." Edwards tilted his head slightly, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You've learned well," he said, his voice low. "But you need to remember something, Michael. This." He gestured around the room, isn't about just being good at what you do. It's about vision. It's about the future. What happens next, after the project ends? What happens when the accolades have faded? Michael looked at Edwards, recognizing the challenge in his words. The real test was never about just completing a task. It was about building something lasting, something that would stand the test of time. Edwards was right, as usual. "I understand," Michael said, his voice unwavering. "And I'm ready for what comes next." Edwards studied him for a moment as if assessing his resolve. Finally, he nodded. "Good. Because this," he tapped the table, his eyes sharp, "is just the beginning. You've proven yourself, Michael, but now you have to prove it to everyone else. The real challenge is learning how to sustain this success, to make sure it doesn't burn out." Michael nodded again, his mind already racing with the possibilities. He had never been content with just one victory. He wanted more. And now he had the tools, the knowledge, and the confidence to take it even further. As the meeting continued, Michael sat quietly, listening as Edwards outlined the next steps for the company. But his mind kept drifting back to his own journey, the journey that had started with a tweet and had brought him here. He had been a jobless graduate, resentful of the rich and powerful. But now, he was one of them, a leader in a world he once mocked. The road to get here had been grueling, filled with setbacks, doubts, and moments of despair. But he had made it, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. The meeting eventually wrapped up, and the executives began to file out, each one offering a quick nod of respect to Michael. They had all seen the transformation in him. They had witnessed the growth, the leadership, the relentless drive. Michael stayed behind for a moment, his eyes fixed on the city skyline outside the window. The view was breathtaking, just as it had always been. But now, he saw it differently. He wasn't just another observer looking up at the world from the bottom. He was a part of it, a part of the system he had once resented. He had proven himself. But more than that, he had learned that success wasn't just about the recognition or the wealth. It was about growth, about resilience, and about the impact you had on the people around you. As he turned to leave the conference room, Edwards caught his eye and gave him a single nod as if to say, "You've done well, but the journey continues." Michael didn't need any more validation. He already knew what he was capable of, and the road ahead was wide open, filled with limitless possibilities. But one thing was clear. Michael was no longer the person who had started this journey. He had risen above the struggles, the doubts, and the fear. And now, as a leader, he would help others do the same. The legacy of his transformation had just begun.